Yes, good morning to you. Morning, everybody. And thank you to Graham for inviting me on here to have a chat with you today. Um, for the last 5 years, most certainly, my wife and I have been working quite diligently and quietly on our worm farm business. Um, and I thought I would start by asking the question, which is inspired by the line from the Life of Brian, where they ask, what have the Romans ever done for us? And I ask the question, what have worms ever done for us? Turns out they do quite an awful lot. So Rosa and I, my wife Rosa, I'm Simon, by the way, Simon Hill. Um, just as a brief who I am, where I come from, what puts me in front of you after 50 odd years on the planet. I was born and brought up on a large agricultural farm, 1,500 acres, on the border of Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire, on the outskirts of Peterborough, just before you get to Stamford. I was born in Stamford. My father only passed away last year, and he farmed in the same village on the same land his whole working life. And after 18 years on the farm, I couldn't get away fast enough. He told me I was never going to make any money in farming. So I went off and studied engineering. So I had an engineering background. Then when I left university, I was determined I was going to go and work and build Formula One cars. I was a big old rugby player, so I was never going to fit in one or be able to drive one. So I thought I'd design them, I'd be good at that. But my business took a completely different turn. I did something completely different. Um, so I've been in business most of my life, then ended up in hospitality here on the Isle of Wight, bought a hotel, then sold that and met my wife of 22 years. And we've been sort of running hospitality, and then 12 years ago we bought a piece of land and didn't really know what we were going to do with it. And my wife said, I want to grow worms. I've read this book. I've read this book by Charles Darwin, and you don't know how important the worms are. And I went, they're great there, but they're not very sexy and they're not going to make us any money. So we still need to continue on with the job we've got. While she built a worm, she established a limited company, the Worm Farm, with a plan to grow worms outside and sell worms and sell the product of worms. So I don't know how much you guys know. I'm presuming from the group that you're in that you'll have a knowledge of the soil and the worms and the current push for regenerative agriculture in this country, the massive price of artificial fertilizer. And again, it did drop down again, but it's gone back up again with the current war. So I've tried to find a solution to fill that gap where farmers and growers and horticulturalists and people at home can use the waste around them to be recycled by worms. So when I say what have the worms ever done for us, you probably didn't realise, they live 6 inches or so below the soil. They poo down there, which we call the worm castings. They come up to the surface. They're so powerful they break channels into the ground. So they're nature's little tillers. So we don't need to plough the soil. They do all that for us, open up channels for water. And in dry periods, their worm castings retain moisture. So where you've got a proliferation of worms in your soil, you get very little runoff. When with a monocrop planting wheat in the field as my father used to, and ripped all the hedges out and ripped all the trees out to make them bigger and bigger, dug up the orchards, planted oilseed rape in there. And if the seeds weren't blown away by the wind, then it was run off into the ditches to the side. So where you've got worms, so the worms open up the channels and the grass grows. If you're with the grazing now, where if you're doing mob grazing or modular grazing, where the animals are only on for a very short period of time, maybe less than 48 hours, and they move on to the next module. What grows behind them grows taller, and as a consequence, the roots go down further. So worms play an absolute massively important part in our soil. And as for the business, what Rosa was doing originally, we built worm bins, great big long, 2 meter wide and about 10 meter long, raised off the ground bins. And similar to how folks grow worms in a bath, you can grow worms in an old bath. But what you have to do is where they come up and eat, and then they go down and deposit the worm castings, all the good stuff's at the bottom. So if you want to get to the worm castings, then you need to dig all of that bathtub out, which is the same with our worm bins. We used to have to. So we had a mechanical little digger, and then you'd have to pass it through a separator, and then separate the worm castings from the worms, put the worms back in the bins, but you disturb it every single time you harvest the worm castings. And it wasn't really making us any money. It kept, Rosa busy, me busy. And she'd be going to Sainsbury's and also Marks and Spencer's, and gathering all of their waste vegetables, so that all that's gone out of date, she'd bring it back to the farm. So she goes into the town, comes back to the countryside on our farm, using obviously petrol and transport, and then she's recycling all the vegetable waste. Now, you may or may not know, but worms, the perfect diet for our worms, and with especially composting worms as such. So there are just less than 30, about 29 different varieties in this country of worms. And the best ones for composting are the dendrobina worm, which is common and it works in cold conditions in Europe, and what they call the European red wiggler or the tiger worm. They work a little bit lower in the ground, and the dendrobina ones nearer to the surface. So we use a combination of those for our worm farming. And also the dendrobina worms are the ones that the fishermen like, so you can sell those as a live product to make money. So all this was going on, and then all of a sudden we had a pandemic and everything stopped. We were able to breathe. We were running a hospitality business, so we looked after over 100 holiday cottages here on the Isle of Wight. So we were able to nobody was allowed to come, so we didn't really have anything to do. So I concentrated all my skills and sat down and redesigned all these bins. So I decided that they weren't working outside, so we were going to need to bring them inside to control the temperature. And I looked at America and Australia, where their climate's far more favourable. And I came across an outfit in upstate New York, and another one in California. And they were proliferant in the wine growing regions because of the quality of the soil that they're growing worm castings. So, and they have in America and certainly in Australia as well, a system where they call it a flow-through worm system. So instead of, let's imagine a bathtub, put the bathtub on legs and cut the bottom off. So you can access all the worm castings from the bottom. And I found several different ways of doing it. They were just dropping it onto the floor and then sweeping the worm castings off the floor. And there were sort of various different scrapers and blades and all sorts of things we were using. So I sort of set about with a pen and paper, and I drew an apparatus which is all made out of aluminium, and it's a meter cubed. So it's the size of an ordinary pallet, a pallet you'd see, a Euro pallet, but it stands about 1 meter to 20 up, so 1.2 meters off the ground, which is kind of the perfect height that sort of a reasonably sized human being can lean over and operate. And so I took all my drawings to an engineering company here on the Isle of Wight and had them build me my first prototype. So we tried and tested over the last few years, and then went into production. The first production model came off last year. So my worm bin, we call it a minga casa, or a worm house. and you basically feed the top of it, and then the worms live in the middle part. They come up, they go down, they poo, and then we've patented a blade system which scrapes the worm castings off the bottom into a tray, which is all part of the same worm house. Then you can pull the tray out and remove the worm castings. And then right at the bottom, we have a tank system which captures any leachate or any moisture that's come through the bin. So worms operate best anywhere between 15 to 20 degrees. And if you start your worm bin off, or my worm bin off, with 1,000 worms, because they have the same sex organs, they can reproduce. They reproduce themselves. So you'll end up with 10,000 worms by the end of your first year, as long as it's had enough food and enough moisture, and kept at a reasonable temperature. So during the pandemic, I decided that Rosa was going to stop driving to Sainsbury's and collect food waste from there. And what we would do is we had two of these shipping containers that come from China, and they're one trip shipping containers. So rather than go back to China, they don't. They sell these off quite cheaply, and you can pick one up for £1,000 or £1,500 or whatever. And I can put they're 2.2 meters wide, so I can get two of our worm bins in an 8-foot shipping container with all the associated tools. And our plan is, and what we're doing is that rather than we go into the town, bring all the things back to us, we could put something like that in the car park of a hospital or a school or a restaurant or any sort of hospitality place where they could recycle all of their waste vegetables, and produce the lovely worm castings out the bottom. So to prove what we were doing and how we were doing it, and that it would work not only in small scale but on a large scale, with farmers who are having to buy artificial fertilizer, down to people at home where we make a smaller bin now. So we chose the garlic farm here on the Isle of Wight, which one can Google, or if you've ever been to the Isle of Wight, it's very hard to miss it. It's a very, very successful enterprise, started over 60, 70 years ago by the Boswell family, which has just grown and grown and grown. They used to grow sweet corn, and then about 50 years ago, they had a switch over to garlic. Everyone told them they were mad. But we have a really great climate for growing garlic over here. And they are now synonymous, so much so, I think, Colin Boswell, the current patriarch of the farm, he told me very, very, with a big smile on his face, that he was a question on Pointless. They asked what vegetable was the Isle of Wight famous for, and the answer was garlic. So, and also he had a name check on the Archers once, where one of the characters were talking, and they said that there's even a guy on the Isle of Wight who's growing garlic, blah blah blah. So we chose them, and we asked them if they were already considering ways to use the vegetable waste from their restaurant here on site, or there on site. And I approached them, and they just the door was wide open. Yeah, please help us. So now, and for the last year, they have been recycling all the vegetable waste from their restaurant, passing it through our worm bin, through our worms, and then the resultant castings, which we're harvesting off the bottom, they are mixed with water in a large IBC, which is a 1,000-litre container, which just about every farm's got. Fertilizer and all sorts of things are delivered in it, and they've got a cage around them, and you can move them around with a forklift. So it's basically a ton of water. So we use rainwater, and we make a tea bag with 10 kilos of worm castings, and we drop it into the IBC and let it soak overnight, and all the magnificent microbes and all nutrients go into the water, and then they spray that on their garlic crop. And so one of my worm bins is enough to do 100 acres. So there's just over 100 acres of the garlic farm. So they've been able to use, one of my bins to fertilize the whole of their garlic crop. And they've seen a 26% increase in yield on the previous year. Now, yields were up quite a lot last year anyway because of the sun, so that may be just anecdotal. But when we were looking to get a grant to build these things for farmers, we employed an expert at Cranfield University, a lady called Dr. Parveen, who's a worm expert. And she's done lab tests with growing tomatoes in worm castings as opposed to soil and as opposed to a grow bag, and proving that you get 50% more yield by growing in worm castings. Hence the reason worms and worm growing is very, very prevalent in the wine growing regions. And in Holland, I found out quite recently, because they grow marijuana and they get bigger plants with better yield. So worms are quite popular over there. So so I say for the last year, this has been going on with Garlic Farm. We've now just done a collaboration with the local school, who are going to take a couple of our worm bins for their teaching and for use from their waste from their refectory. And then we've also been approached by Europe's largest grower of leaves and herbs, a company called Vitacress. I was on a call with them yesterday, and we're going over to see them on the 10th of April, with a view to doing a sort of a bespoke machine for them, because they create about 200 tons of waste leaves. So just to give you a recipe, well, not recipe, but what the worms eat. So worms work best on a diet of carbon and nitrogen. So some of you may know this, I may be boring you, but so you need a carbon source and a nitrogen source. On our own farm, where we've got 30 llamas, we use the llama poo for our nitrogen, and then we gather up cardboard. We've got a massive shredder, so we mix 50% carbon from the cardboard and 50% nitrogen from the llama poo. But at the garlic farm, they also use shredded cardboard, but they use as a nitrogen source coffee grounds and the waste from their kitchen, vegetable waste from their kitchen. Again, it needs to be 50-50. And that's quite important, because if Dr. Parveen did an experiment when she did a study in the Philippines to do with palm oil, and she was feeding worms, and she took it to the extreme where she gave them 100% nitrogen, and that makes the composting bin anaerobically break down the food, because worms don't have any teeth, so they like their food quite mushy and broken down. That's where they come up and eat the leaves and the dried grass and the vegetables and the apples and everything, and the poo that's on the ground. So if you go to 100% nitrogen, you'll kill them, because they'll just get hot and die. In Australia, we've had, well, not we, the worm farmers in Australia and California, they usually put their worm operating machinery in the shade, and they quite often freeze the vegetables that they feed to the bins to cool the bins down. Whereas in wintertime, Rosa and I were adding extra nitrogen. So we were probably 60-40 to try and heat the bin up here in this country. So there is but if you can keep them in a polytunnel, or if you can keep them indoors in, like, as I say, these containers which we're now using, then they keep them at just about the perfect temperature. And they just need, as long as you get the right amount of moisture, it's quite an easy machine to operate and get the best possible results. So so I'll ask you. So when I said what have the worms ever done for us, they've done an awful lot. and they prevent runoff for farmers. If you without worms, there would be compaction in the soil. You'd have runoff. There'd be lack of nitrogen. So, any farmer will tell you, or any agronomist, the best way to find out what's going on under there is to dig a sort of a foot square hole and have a look how many worms you've got in there, and that will dictate how healthy your soil is. So, this is what we're trying to do, one worm at a time. So, has anybody got any questions or anything I can answer? I've tried. I don't know how to show my screen. I could show you some images of our bins.
Funny
But
enough, Simon, I was going to ask you if you had any presentation to give. So yes, if you could move your mouse down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, a green arrow will come up saying share screen. You're on a regular Windows PC.
this laptop, yeah. So where is it at the bottom?
So if you're
Share.
on you need to be on your Zoom screen and then move the mouse down to the bottom, and a little whole bunch of buttons pops up, and one of them is called share. Just there you go. And then it'll ask you another question, which is which of your browser window. There you go. You're in great shape. So I'll leave it to you to go through these. Thank you.
Can you see that?
Absolutely.
So that's one of our this is one of our worm bins and a little advert for them. So if you I don't know, can you see my mouse moving on there? Can you see that?
Yes. Yep. 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 Yep.
Yeah, so this is the blade system which sits inside here, and I've got a little video which I'm hoping I'm going to be able to share with you if I can find out to share it again, of Joe at the garlic farm starting off our first one. So what we do in the very first instance, and hopefully I'm going to get slicker and better at this as I have to speak to people. I'm not a salesperson, and this is the first sort of presentation I've ever done. So we feed in the top a mixture. So it's easy to say a shovel of ground chopped up cardboard, along with you chopped up vegetable, the same amount. But to start the bin off, that's probably not the hardest thing, but that's the most important thing. So inside the bin is a grid system. So in America, I watched this guy do it, and he did it with just conduit, with about one of my fingers gaps in between each conduit. And when the bin's built itself up, it naturally sits there. So all of you have probably done it. I don't know, you've dug into your compost heap, after a couple of years, and you can dig in there and it'll just sit there. And then obviously eventually it'll fall down again, but it sort of self-suspends itself. And other ones I was seeing in California, they had almost like squares, like chicken wire, chicken mesh at the bottom. But the blade didn't work very well for that. So we have a blade that runs between, if you imagine the conduit and the bars, this bar pulls in and out from here, and the worm castings drop into the bottom. So my very first prototype, I went to a boat builder in here on the island, which there's quite a few of them. And he wanted to charge me 10,000 quid to build my prototype. Luckily, I sort of hooked up with a company called Island Sheet Metal, and they make all sorts of boxes and everything for GKN, which are based here on the Isle of Wight. So the panels are all insulated aluminium. And that's so that so that vermin can't get into it. I've got a massive, great big wheelie bin, and I show people the top of it where the rats have eaten into the top part of it, a dirty, great big hole. So that we can keep worms and everything, all the vermin out, which is why we built out of aluminium. Right, I'm going to try and show you another.
Whilst you're looking for your link to your video, I just need to say that I think whoever thought of the underground movement is a brilliant piece of marketing.
That isn't me. And
Yeah, well, I think it's sheer genius. Well done.
I've actually managed to trademark that as well. So like I said, we've been keeping quiet because I think there will probably be I'm hoping there's going to be quite a lot of take up, and I don't want to not be able to meet the demand, if you understand me.
Sure.
So Our plan at the moment is we've got the tomato store here on the island as well who are interested. And they sell tomatoes all over the country. And Isle of Wight tomatoes are becoming a thing. You know, we've got the garlic farm, and they had my original one, which is still going really well, and I've just delivered two more to them, which hopefully, if I can play this video, you can see Jo Boswell, who's the owner. I filmed her last Thursday, where we just started the two bins off. I'm hoping this is going to work. Can you see that?
Yes. Are you expecting us to hear sound?
Yes.
You need to stop and start again because there's a special button you need to talk. When you go into the share screen in Zoom,
Yeah.
there's a button on the second screen that says share audio or something like that, bottom left, I think. So you probably need to stop sharing, Simon, come out of where you are, and then go back into sharing. There you go. Yep. So now go back into sharing, and then on the second screen that pops up, there will be I think a bottom left corner. It says something like sharing audio. Let me see if I can find it on my own screen.
Yeah, sound.
You found it. Okay, good.
Okay.
Hi, so I'm very
Can
excited
you hear
to
that?
be
Absolutely, brilliant.
these two new worm farms that we've got from the worm farm. They are completely empty right now, so if we have a look inside, what we've done is we've put 2 layers of cardboard. So underneath this cardboard you can see is the bottom rack. The cardboard goes on top with, as we've started in this one, you can see, this is wet, quite wet, damp coconut coir. So we've soaked 10 blocks of coconut coir, which we're then going to put in the base. The cardboard is stopping that dropping straight through the grid. But in time, obviously, that cardboard is going to rot down so that eventually we will be able to pull that grid back and forth and in this tray collect our worm casts or vermicast, which is the amazing stuff that we're doing this all for. Excellent for nourishing the soil. So what else we're going to put in with this coir so that the worms are happy in an environment that they understand and know? We've taken all of this from our previous worm farm, and this is absolutely, look at that, it's absolutely filled with worms. And what this is merely food waste from our Rydan and wood chips, which you can see no sign of anymore. The worms have broken it all down, maybe a few eggshells in there, but the worms have broken it all down and they're very happy in there. So we're going to take a bit of that, mix it in with the coir, and there we go. That's the start of our worm farms. Well,
Right, there you go. Can you hear that? Do you see that?
Yeah, we did.
Jolly good. So that was last Thursday, unedited. That's just as it was on my phone. So takes about 3 months before you see any kind of progress. And what we would be expecting to do, in kilos terms, is the bin will probably take about 20 kilos a week. And then after about 3 months, it depends on temperature and how well the worms are settled in. And they generally, worms don't know up from down. So in the worm bin, they live in the coir for a start, and then we put food on top, and we'll put cardboard on top of that as well, just to stop them escaping up the sides, so they know where. Then they don't have eyes, but their skin is sensitive to light, so they don't like the light, so they like it to be nice and dark. And adding 20 kilos each week will build up just to about 6 inches or so from the top. And then at the bottom, that cardboard, by those 3 months, the cardboard breaks down. And then worm castings start to just drop out of the bottom. And then sort of once you get to the 12-week period, you can operate the blade and then scrape the worm castings off. So each week you should be putting in about 20 kilos and getting about the same out in worm castings. So that's what's happening at the garlic farm. So that's what they're so pleased with the first one that they had that she's ordered two. So I have two of them, which I can show you. I think I've got a picture of that somewhere. So can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Right. So that's two of our Mingocasas at the worm farm. So that was in a this container was only 8 foot long, but would be enough, and it keeps reasonably cool in the summer, and they're really quite warm in the winter. So we have got great plans for this. So this is going to be my proving ground. So, I mean, nature says it will work. Science says it will work. It's been the other one is just down the opposite side of that field, in just to the side of the car park. So that's been outside for a year, just under a little lean-to, and we put a jacket on it during the winter last year, and that one worked all the way through the winter. So yeah, so we are at a sort of a fledgling stage, and wherever we go, whoever we show, and wherever we talk, people are really interested and want to do something with it. So, like I say, they're designed to be bolted together, so I can make a double one, a quadruple one, and we'd probably say up to about 5 in length. And that would be each one of those boxes there will do 100 acres of arable or pasture, depending on, and you would use it, spraying it on, foliar spray on. And I've got 10 that have just come off the production line now, of a smaller one which is 400 millimeters, so a third of the size of that. It fits nice and neatly in the back of my car. And we're using it at the moment for demonstration for schools, and Rosa's got about 4 of them going here, and we've sold a handful of them as well, and people are getting great results in their own sort of homes, in their own yards. But I think that anyone who's got a polytunnel ought to have one of these. Anyone who's got a stables or a yard could recycle their own poo. We've just been asked to provide 2 for the zoo, Graham, over your way. So Wild at Heart, they're having 2 in a similar sort of setup as this, but they're going to build a purpose-built shed because they have a garden club and everything there. And what I didn't realise is they're buying in worms to feed the raccoons, and but they do what? Sorry, and composting. Yeah. So they have a children's mud kitchen as well out there. And these are going to sit next door to them. So I've got great plans for that. Has anybody got any questions they want to ask me?
I have a whole host of questions, but let me give someone else an opportunity first before I take up all the time. So if anyone else has a question, please, by all means, raise your hand or just start speaking. There you go. I knew you'd be there, Stuart. Please go ahead. You're on mute at the moment.
Right, thanks for that. That was a fascinating talk. I do home composting,
Yes.
but I've never really thought of just trying to collect the worm cast from it and using that as a fertilizer. Have you done any analysis of the worm casts?
Yeah. We have all that. So when we were working with Dr. Parveen, and she had a load of our worms, and one of her interns has done a load of research on that, which is a lot of. I can send you some links to those papers that have been published. Yes, I mean it's
great.
So one of my plans is, and I don't know whether we'll actually do this, I want to either give one of these to Charles Darwin, or I don't know whether any of you follow Charles Darwin, but he's a great no-dig gardener and a great YouTube personality with millions of followers, and he's mad keen on composting and does hot bins. He does sort of traditional composting, and he has a whole composting area. And I just think it's unless you've thought about it, and if it wasn't for my wife, I wouldn't know anything about this. And I wouldn't have had any interest in it. It's just that when you understand how these flow through worm bins work, whereas if you've had bought a worm farm or a worm wormery in the past, and the plastic trays and all the fat that goes with it, they do work, but people sort of lose interest. Whereas this system, you can kind of just leave it. If you can't really do it any damage. It just won't produce. But there are ways, with adding the right amount of moisture, putting a temperature gauge in there, checking your pH, and adjusting accordingly, whether you add some lime into it. It's, for a farmer who wants to save on fertilizer, I think these could be priceless.
Thank you. The other thing I want to know was, how long do they last for? Or do they just go on forever?
They go on forever. I mean, well, I don't know yet, because my first prototype, which I'm still using, I built 4 years ago now. Yeah, 4 years ago. But I built them. First ones we built out of wood. And there's a guy on YouTube called Captain Stan in California. He had the principle is exactly the same, but he just has a rake, and he rakes off the bottom of his, and he has followers and does tutorials, but he doesn't capture it. Whereas I've tried, I don't know, my wife says I over-engineer everything, but I've tried to solve every single problem that I can imagine that people have. And I flew out to the Algarve just before Christmas to go and meet a farm there, which is an education centre. And I mean, I'm not woo-woo or anything like that, but it's a bit woo-woo. But they've got, or they have a flow-through system very similar to what I've seen in America. And again, they'd obviously copied something and developed their own one out of wood, but they had a dreadful rat problem on the farm. And I said, look, I'd got as far as you've got, but then I've moved it on and we've gone to aluminium. So I'm trying to find a manufacturer in Portugal to do them because of the wine, the amount of wine that's grown out there. And when you put one of these on a farm rather than necessarily in a home setting or in a council setting or whatever, you're keeping all the waste and everything on your farm. All your inputs come from your farm. There's no mileage in it. If you're buying artificial fertilizer from the Ukraine and spraying that on your land, with all the goodness is coming out of the land and you're not putting it back in, whereas this puts it all back in. So we tried to get some funding to develop it, which I don't know. I lost a bit of faith in it, to be honest with you, because we spent a lot of time, put a lot of effort into it, and we got through 2 or 3 rounds. Yes, we were asking for 50,000 quid, and they all loved it, but they couldn't quite understand it. So I've had to do the proving, as it were. So I've had to put the investment in, have them built with money from our other business, to prove that they work, and they're working. So at the moment we kept quiet because you didn't know whether it was going to work, it was going to fail, or but now we're singing from the rooftops. So when I was approached by Graham, I thought, yeah, I need to start talking about this. I need to tell people what we're doing and what's available, because you can go and Google, you can't buy a flow through worm farm in Europe. People just aren't doing it necessarily, to produce them. So it's quite a unique product, and we want to get it right. And I think my ambition was, even before Christmas, I think, that I wanted to be worldwide and I wanted to do these things. And and I said, oh, we'll get them made in China. My wife says, you're not making them in China. So so they're hand built here. They're hand welded and crafted. So we're kind of thinking that what we want to do is grow the business, or grow this as a kind of Isle of Wight things, because I can deliver each and every one of these to anywhere on the Isle of Wight. We're only 27 miles wide and 12, 14 miles high, so we're tiny. But there's a lot of interest here in these, and people keep approaching us, and so I want it to kind of be an Isle of Wight thing, and so much so that I end up having to get on a ferry and go and deliver these, or we have them manufactured, on the mainland, but to this high standard, so the I can't do anything by half. So maybe it is over-engineered, like my answer, going on forever. So hopefully, yeah. I would easily put a 10-year guarantee on my worm bin.
Simon, you need to talk to IKEA and get this built as a flat pack that people can just ship it everywhere easily. But let's move on to other questions. Sue, you've been very patient.
Oh, no, thank you. It's all fascinating. And I hear the impact that you could have on farming. A lot of us here are more involved with our local communities. Just to clarify one point, the food waste is only organic vegetable type stuff rather than all the food waste, just to clarify that point.
Yeah, so to clarify, if you can feed worms anything that grew out of the ground. So cows and sheep don't grow out of the ground. So there's no meat, no fish going in there. And not too heavy on citrus, so no more than 10% of citrus.
Fine.
They don't really like that.
Yeah. Okay. So go on.
But I mean, Rosa is they're presently developing a system for dog poo.
Oh wow!
So, yeah, so she's developing a bin for dog poo, but it wouldn't be. So what would come out of the bottom, or what is coming out the bottom, is amazing, but I think you wouldn't put it on your vegetables, but it'd be fine on your flowers.
Yeah.
Likewise, anything that comes out that leach out the bottom, we generally either put it back in the top or use it for flowers. And our fertilizer that we spray on with the worm castings is a worm tea. Rosa also used to make a tea with not to drink, but to put on your plants. What happens when you spray a tomato plant with worm castings, the way that we do, or garlic, the plant thinks it's under attack. So what it does, it puts up its defenses. So although it's not a pesticide, it kind of acts as a pesticide when you're applying it. I'm told by the scientists.
Yeah. So thank you. So basically, looking at we've got two important things that are happening at the moment, that the food waste is coming in under Simply Recycling for most areas from the 1st of April. And I personally think it's going to make it more difficult to encourage people to home compost, and how you sort that out. But that's not for today. But my main thing is, how do we take this forward to, say, schools, allotment sites? How can we make it work that there's a cycle there for those? You put one of your little ones on an allotment site, encourage the community to bring their stuff, you get somebody to look after it. How can you make that work within that sort of setting? And school.
Okay, so that your echo. What I'm sniggering is because my wife sat in front of me, and that's always her next question. So the question you just asked me is exactly so. We've set up a CIC, a community interest company, called Isle of Worms, and that is specifically for the teaching. So when we're selling these worm bins, I've written a whole what happens in the first 12 weeks, or what to expect in the first 12 weeks. There's about 20-30 pages of frequently asked questions and all the problems that we've ever encountered, lack of moisture. So teaching is always going to be a fundamental part of our business, and certainly my wife's charity side of it, for the community. So we've been approached by the Gurnard people here on the Isle of Wight, growing in Gurnard, and we're discussing whether we donate one to them for them to use, and we will use the results from that as part of our publicity. So that will be part of our advertising, if advertising budget, as it were. So in it, the most important thing, Sue, of what you'd said was that somebody would take ownership of the bin. So where we've been able to work closely with the garlic farm, with the one that first went in there, we were very hands-on. I mean, they've got a lovely restaurant, so it's no big deal for Rosa and I to go at least once a week and have breakfast and make sure, monitor that their bin, that they're doing the right things and everything's working perfectly. But it's when you hand it over to somebody else, there's very few skills you need. You just need to use your eyes and ears and take ownership of the bin. So yes, I mean, and as for schools, I mean, every second breath, my wife said, doing this, but what about the schools? So we've gone to Ryde Private School here on the Isle of Wight, and they're going to put it in as part of their curriculum. They're also introducing bees. They're fortunate they've got a little polytunnel, and they've got from prep school right up to A levels. So they're looking to bring that in there. I honestly don't know how it works in the mainstream school. Because I haven't ventured in there, although my local parish councillor, she's a teacher, and she's asked if we can go and do a talk at her school, which is absolutely no problem. But I would love to see it find its way onto the curriculum. I mean, you should know how to add up and speak and read, but you should also know what's going on below your feet. So
so on the practical side, sorry, to be absolutely clear, the castings that are come out of the bottom cannot be used when your compost bin has finished and it's reasonable, nothing like as good as yours, I can tell you that. You can use it straight away on the soil. With what is produced for the castings isn't suitable for putting in your soil. Am I understanding it correctly?
No, with the greatest respect, no, I haven't explained it clearly enough. So I found a vehicle of explaining it. So you know what I mean by a molehill, don't you?
Yeah.
Do you know what the molehill's made of?
Worms crawling around inside, I think.
Right. So you are 100% right. So my father used to tell me, and he didn't know what it was. He used to tell me it was topsoil, but it's the best topsoil known to man. He said, if you've got a molehill, scoop it out into a plant pot and shove some tomato plants in there and watch what grows. So moles eat worms, all right? So, and they also use imagine a layer of cake. So where the worm castings sit 6 inches or so below the soil, the moles work their way through the worm castings. They then push those worm castings out of the soil, and that's where you end up at the top. So that's a pile of worm castings. That's why it's so black and golden. And that's all we're doing. So rather than finding a machine that can push it up to the top and we can pick it off the top, I've created a machine that just pulls it off the bottom where they leave it. So that you can use it as an amendment to the soil. It's just that I've probably skipped a stage, because most people would dig in, a bag of worm castings into their soil to improve it, and that's what you used to do. In California, I would watch them 10, 12 years ago, where they would get the worm castings out of big long bins like we were doing. They weren't little units like this. They were great big long bins, and they'd dig them out, and then they would dig that into the soil, and they'd put it around the roots of the vines. But it's this system of making worm tea. There's people been doing it for 30, 40 years, maybe even longer. But it's in the last 5 years, it's become known in the worm world that it's probably the single best way to apply it to your land. So there's businesses in Australia that they'll come round with a a machine and a vehicle, and they'll spray your lawn, and you pay like $20-30. But it's just natural, rather than Green Thumb coming around and putting nitrogen or whatever they put onto your lawn. They just spray worm castings, a worm tea onto your grass. We also add two other things in there which I didn't mention earlier when we make the tea. And in Australia, if you wanted to, or in California, it's about the same price. If you wanted to buy one of those IBCs for your farm to spray onto your land to cover 100 acres, that's $2,000 to buy it. And where farmers have got their own inputs and gardeners have got their own inputs, they can use it there. So yeah, spraying it from a tea is one of the best, most useful ways of covering a large area with the right amount of fertilizer.
Brilliant, thank you.
You're welcome, Sue.
Kirsten, would you like to leap in, please?
Hi, thank you. Actually, you've been so comprehensive answering other people's questions that part of mine is answered. However, the bit that I haven't quite got a handle on is you mentioned a very large increase in the number of worms, up to 1,000 going up to another huge number of thousands. Thank you. You mentioned the fishermen, but one assumes that to keep these bins going, you almost have to divide a bit like you divide a beehive. So take some of those worms off. Can you just elaborate on how often you have to do that and what you would do with them, please?
Yeah,
Thank you.
So they are, and a bit like they say where a fish will grow to the size of its tank, worms will do exactly the same thing. So if you're not feeding them and they're not going to need moisture and they're freezing cold, they're not going to reproduce. However, they'll just keep reproducing until there's not enough space. So if they run out of space, they'll stop reproducing. So what you would do, you would take the load of worms out, or in the instance of the Wild at Heart animal sanctuary zoo here on the island, so that they will be taking them out and feeding them to the raccoons. Whereas we take them out and start off another bin, or you can sell them online, or put them into your garden, or feed them to the robins. But they will just keep going and going. So they'll live for about 3, maybe 4 years, a worm. So the one we just did at the garlic farm, so they've been in there for a year. There was loads and loads of juveniles that we also transferred. So in those two that I've left on the screen there, when we finished preparing their first stage last Thursday, we removed a load of worms and worm castings from the first bin that went into those. Yeah, so there is a little bit of maintenance to be had, but you can always get worms out of your bin. You just feed in one area. So as you look at the bin, if you just feed an area the size of your hand to put vegetables or whatever there, they'll migrate to that area. So then you'll be able to take them out from there.
Okay. So in a related question, I also home compost, and I get very excited by the worms in the compost and putting them on my garden. I have a particular corner of the garden that is really awful. It's I think ex-farmland or something that's really compacted, hasn't got worms, not in great shape. Do just putting worms on the top in a block of compost onto what is rubbish ground underneath, does that give you any hope of increasing the worm count, or do they just die off because they don't like the ground you put them on?
No, they'll be fine. They'll be fine. I would probably suggest broad forking it first if you've got a broad fork, and then do it. Yes, they would improve it. You do have, because I had the same question. So where these worm bins are on the garlic farm, immediately adjacent to it, they've got their neighbours have got horses, and they've got some. They started off some composting bins out of pallets, and the guy said to me, he said, "Can I have some of your worms to put into here?" I said, "You can." I said, but they're actually doing a job in here, and because we are containing them, they can't go anywhere. They don't disappear. They're going to do more work in here than they would do in there. I said the chickens will probably go through there and nick them all out the top of there, or they'll go down and disappear out of sight. So yes, it does, but you are also feeding, the birds and the hedgehogs, but that might be what you want to do as well, Kirsten. So.
Actually, I'm very into the wildlife side of things, and in another capacity, so that doesn't bother me. I don't mind sharing. It's cool. Yeah, thank you very much.
Anybody else got any questions, please, before I start leaping in? And some of these are pertinent to the Isle of Wight, so if people want to log off, that would be fine. And let me just take the opportunity of mentioning that next week we are going to be having Rick Casal from the Carbon Copy coming up with their whole new way of collecting environmental stories. So I think it's really going to be worth listening to. I recommend it. And questions for Simon. Are you familiar with the regenerative farm on the island where they're doing all the organic work?
The permaculture down in the Undercliff.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I imagine they would be interested to see you. And I've done quite a lot of work in a previous job with the National Allotment Society, and they've always been brilliant and helpful. They've come up with all sorts of ideas that your average Joe never thinks of.
Wow.
Like, for instance, I always thought if you had an allotment, you had to find a piece of decent land, but they say no. So you just put decent ground on the soil on top of it in a sort of a ridge type form, and away you go. It doesn't matter what the land is underneath. So I just think what they're doing across the country would actually go quite well together.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I mean, for at our farm in Shelfleet, Rosa and I we're planning and under construction. We're duplicating what we're doing at the garlic farm. So at the garlic farm, we've set these worm bins there, and in front of it is going to be a market garden.
Okay.
So, and it's going to be a no dig market garden. So is cardboard's going down, and then on top of that, worm castings and some stuff from the Isle of Wight compost. So some Isle of Wight compost. So they're growing in Isle of Wight compost with wood chip borders, walkways all the way around. So 75 centimeters wide, 10 meters long.
Okay. So moving on from that, we're having in Bembridge on the 18th of April an environment event day where we're actually bringing in all sorts of people to tell our populace what can be done in the environment. I would love it if you could come along, which is this Saturday, by the way. And it's also going to be, I don't know if you've heard about the National Emergency Briefing, which is that. Okay, so there's in November last year, there was a big meeting of bigwigs who wanted to make it clear to the politicians that the climate emergency is much more severe than anybody has actually appreciated. And they're coming out with a movie. And we're going to be building on the back of that, of what we can be doing locally to improve things. So I think that having worm farms all over Bembridge is going to be a big deal. So I do hope you can come along. I think it's going to be a big thing. And the local school, I think, would love to hear from you. So I'm basically booking your time for the next couple of months, if you wouldn't mind, please. It was a really, really wonderful expression. I do have one question which arose from your position. You sold the first unit to the garlic farm, which was just big enough to spray their 100 acres. So you had covered what they've got. So my natural question is, why have they bought 2 more from you? What are they going to do with those products?
Specifically the market garden. So where they're positioned, if you go to the garlic farm, you know where the meadow used to be, the wildflower meadow.
Yes, beyond the car park. Yep.
Right. So that whole area is now been given over to Jo, and she's basically building a showcase for her talents as a grower, and she's complete. I don't know. Do you know who Richard Perkins is?
Yep.
So both Rosa and I have done his masterclass in market gardening, having tried to get away from farming and growing. my entire life. I'm just enveloped in it. And so she's doing the same thing. So she's doing what we're doing. So we're building a market garden predominantly at the request of a couple of restaurants as well who want us to grow for them, and also to show off how good our product, the worm castings, are. Because with the no dig system, you don't dig it. You cover the ground with cardboard, and you basically build the soil up from the ground up. So they've had these to create enough compost to grow. So there's 10 meter beds first, and then that will grow to 20, and then a great big pumpkin patch right down by where the car park is. And that'll all be fertilized by worm castings.
Okay, thank you. I'll be in touch with you about all of that. Let's go on to Kirsten. You got another question?
I think I forgot to lower my hand. Apologies.
And Stuart, did I see you come up for a moment and then disappear again?
Yeah, I was just going to finally ask, as an engineer, when are you going to make one of these which is self-regulated thermally?
Well, there you go. So this is this is exactly where I'm at. So the idea of by putting them in a container and putting one of those Jackery photovoltaic cells on top and a battery, then I can have Wi-Fi and I can monitor everything from the moisture to the MPK, and that's where I am heading. I want to put a little copper bars in it so I can know exactly what the temperature is. There's I don't know. I love my music as well, and they always say when they sign a band, they want to know, what the third album's going to be, and I've got all sorts of iterations and where I can take this. So I'm starting here, but my mind is full of ways that they can be regulated. Just because they don't, worms don't send you invoices, they just repay, good management. So that's what I want to be. So if you be a good custodian of them, keep them as damp as they want to be, and provide them with the best habitat, they'll work for you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Any more
Stash.
questions from anyone, please? Right. Well, Simon, that was just brilliant. Thank you so much. So if this is your first public engagement, I hope it's given you the groundings for lots more, because it was really quite intriguing. So you're on a good topic. Thank you very much. I will be back in touch with you shortly, and thank you everybody for showing up.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Cheers, Graham.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.